Let's step into a story that really captured the world's attention. It begins, tragically, on Valentine's Day 2013. We're in Pretoria, South Africa.
Yeah, and instead of, romance or celebration, the early morning hours are shattered by the sound of 4 gunshots.
Chilling. And behind a locked bathroom door inside a luxury home, a young woman is found dead.
And the man who fired those shots, well, it was Oscar Pistorius.
Not just anyone. This was the Blade Runner. I mean, a global icon.
Exactly. Someone celebrated everywhere for overcoming unbelievable physical hurdles to compete at the absolute peak of athletics.
So this story, it just immediately spirals into this stark, almost unbelievable tragedy, doesn't it? You have the fall of this celebrated hero.
Yeah, a love story that ends in violent death, and this national figure suddenly becomes a convicted killer. It's a lot.
It really is. And so in this deep dive, we want to try and unpack the layers of what happened. We'll look at the material we've gathered to understand, how did we get from that inspiring rise to the awful events of that night, and then the whole complex legal drama that unfolded afterwards.
It's a story that touches on so much more than just one man, one incident. It forces you to think about the gap between someone's public image and their private life.
Definitely. And things like the nature of justice itself, how fame plays into things, violence, loss. It's all wrapped up in this.
So to really get the weight of it, you kind of have to appreciate just how high Oscar Pistorius had climbed.
Let's start there, because his background, it's genuinely extraordinary, isn't it?
Absolutely. Born without fibulas in his lower legs. He had both legs amputated before he was even a year old.
Wow.
But he didn't just, learn to cope, he soared. By the time he was 17, he was already winning Paralympic gold medals.
Incredible. But the moment he really broke through into that global mainstream consciousness, that was 2012, right?
Yes. Making history. The first double amputee ever to compete in the Olympics.
That was such a huge moment. Yeah. And the material we looked at really describes him as becoming more than just an athlete. He was seen as like a global inspiration.
Totally. A symbol of strength, resilience. Someone who seemed to just smash through perceived human limits.
The Blade Runner, that nickname just perfectly encapsulated that image, didn't it? Defying all expectations. The world really did see a hero.
Which, of course, makes the shift to February 14th, 2013 so incredibly jarring. The whole narrative just pivots.
Yeah, from those bright stadium lights to the dark, early hours inside his home in Pretoria. 4 shots fired. Through a locked bathroom door.
And behind that door, Reeva Steenkamp.
Tell us a bit about her. The details really paint a picture of someone quite special.
Yeah, she was 29, a model, yes, but also, interestingly, a law graduate. People describe her as a rising star, beautiful, yes, but also really outspoken, passionate, especially about women's rights.
Which adds another layer of tragedy to it all.
It does, and she was struck by 3 of those 4 bullets. The sources specify they were hollow point bullets.
The kind designed to cause maximum damage.
Exactly. 1 hit her hip, 1 her arm, and then the fatal shot to her head.
Awful. And right away you have these 2 completely conflicting stories emerging.
Polar opposites. Pistorius's claim from the very beginning was consistent. He thought she was an intruder, a panicked mistake in the dark.
Right. That was his narrative. But the prosecution, they came forward with a dramatically different version.
Completely. Their story was rooted in domestic conflict. They painted a picture of rage, of control, suggesting there'd been an argument that escalated with deadly consequences.
And what makes that intruder claim difficult, based on the evidence that came out, are the questions it leaves hanging, right?
Yeah, the material highlights these points, like why didn't he check if Reeva was actually in the bed beside him before firing at the door?
That's a big one. And why did Reeva have her mobile phone with her inside the toilet cubicle?
Exactly. These specific details, according to the sources, they just didn't quite seem to mesh with his story of a simple panicked reaction to a perceived threat.
It made it harder to reconcile with the physical evidence at the scene.
It suggested, at least to the prosecution, that maybe something else was going on, something more deliberate, or at the very least, incredibly reckless.
So the courts had to grapple with these 2 completely different realities.
Yeah.
What happened initially?
Well, the first trial, presided over by Judge Thakazile Masapa, ended with a verdict of culpable homicide.
Which is basically South Africa's equivalent of manslaughter.
That's right, not murder. And the initial sentence reflected that, 5 years in prison.
But that wasn't the end of it.
No, not at all. The prosecution felt very strongly that this verdict didn't fit the crime, that it didn't properly account for the loss of life, so they appealed.
On that appeal, that was a major turning point.
Huge. In 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned Judge Mazzapa's verdict. They found him guilty of murder.
So a murder conviction and the sentence.
It was increased. There was some legal back and forth, but ultimately it settled at 15 years imprisonment.
And the sources mentioned, there was still public discussion about whether that was enough or too much. But legally.
Legally, the process had run its course. As the material puts it, the law had spoken.
Okay. Which brings us more or less up to date. What's his status now?
According to reports from January 2024, Oscar Pistorius was released on parole.
And what do we know about his life since then?
It's described as incredibly low profile, almost invisible is the word used. He's reportedly living with his uncle in Waterkloof.
A suburb of Pretoria.
Right. And apparently giving no media interviews, making no public statements, just quiet.
That quietness is such a stark contrast, isn't it, to the ongoing reality for Reeva Steenkamp's family?
Oh, absolutely. The sources emphasize that for them, it's a lifetime of pain. There's no parole from grief.
There's a powerful quote included from Reeva's mother, June Steenkamp. Even after offering forgiveness, her words really capture that enduring sense of loss.
Yeah, it's incredibly moving. She said, and I'm quoting here, "No amount of time served will bring Reeva back. We're the ones serving the life sentence."
Gosh, that says it all, really.
Okay.
It highlights the permanent, devastating impact.
It really does.
So when you look at all the details, all the source material, this story becomes so much bigger than just one crime, doesn't it? It acts like a lens.
It does. A lens on some really difficult societal questions. How do we deal with violence against women, especially when fame and power dynamics are involved?
Yeah, and how does that intense public image, that celebrity status, influence how we perceive things, maybe even influence the legal process itself?
And what does justice truly mean in the end? For the victims, for their families, for society? These aren't easy questions.
No, not at all. And the material kind of leaves us with this one final haunting thought to ponder.
The question of who we become behind closed door.
Exactly. That difference between the public face, the person the world thinks they know.
And the private reality.
Yeah.
And the absolutely devastating consequences that can unfold when those two things collide so tragically.
It's just a stark reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
That behind all the headlines, the legal arguments, there are real human stories, real people living with an immeasurable, unending loss.
Absolutely. A profound loss.